Hi, I'm James Turnbull. I'm an expert on trusts. I make videos, educational videos about trusts and foundations. Today's video is an introduction to the history of trusts. I'm just going to give us some feeling of where these things came from, a little bit of information about how they work, although it's the next video, What is a Trust, that is really going to go into the nitty-gritty of what a trust is and how a trust works. We start today with a fairy tale. It's a true fairy tale. It's a true fairy tale in the sense that this story was repeated many times in history, and it was the beginnings of the reason that we have trusts today. Of course, the names of the characters have been changed, but the story is true. Our story begins with Sir Bob. Sir Bob is the lord of his manor. He is a knight. He's a very brave knight. He has a horse, but he has also a castle. He has many lands. He has many benefits that come with being the lord of the manor. He has some responsibilities as well. But anyway, for whatever reason, Sir Bob decides that it is his duty, his obligation, that he would like to go and fight for God in the Crusades. Now, in those days, that was no small undertaking because Bob had to travel on horse from England to the Middle East, there to fight, to risk his life, and maybe to die, but hopefully to return. And that whole process took a number of years, perhaps 5 years, perhaps longer. So the question Bob had was, that's great, but what am I going to do? Who's going to look after my castle? Who's going to look after my lands and benefit from my castle and lands while I'm gone? And who's going to take responsibility for my castle and lands while I'm gone? And it was lucky that Sir Bob had a cousin Hubert. And we can see here Cousin Hubert, and looking at Cousin Hubert maybe give us a clue to what's going to happen next. But Bob goes to Hubert and says, Hubert, I'm going to go away, fight in the Crusades for 5 years or so. Will you look after my lands? Will you look after my castle? Will you take responsibility for my knightly duties? But will you also accept the benefit of being the lord of the manor until I come back? Will you take care of everything for me while I'm gone? And Hubert said, yes, Bob, of course, I shall do that for you. And Bob set off. And luckily, he didn't die. After 5 years, he returned, and he said to Hubert, Hubert, I'm back. Thanks for looking after everything. Please transfer everything back to me. And of course, Hubert, who had grown used to the benefits and the pleasures of being the knight, decided that he didn't want to do that. Now, legally in those days, Sir Bob had a problem because he had signed everything over to Hubert. There was a court system, but if Sir Bob went to the courts would say, no, we can see the documents here where you have signed over all of these rights and entitlements to Hubert, and so the castle and the lands and the titles, they belong to Hubert now. Not to you anymore, Sir Bob. I'm very sorry. But in those days it was a feudal society and there was a king, and Sir Bob had been fighting for the king, for God and for his king. And so what Bob would do is he would then go to the king would listen to his story, and the king, being all-powerful, would overrule the courts and would give the lands back to Sir Bob. And here is the king. And he actually got a little bit tired of this, genuinely, because people were coming to him constantly with these requests. It was taking up a lot of his time. And so what he did was he passed a statute. And the statute is here, which I shall now read in my kingly voice. All petitions that touch the seal shall go first to the Chancellor, and those that touch the Exchequer to the Exchequer, and those that touch the justices or the law of the land to the justices, and those that touch the jury to the justices of the jury. And if the matters are so great, or so much of grace, that the chancellor and the others cannot do what is asked without the king, then they shall take them to the king to know his will, and that no petition come before the king and his council, except by the hands of the said chancellor and the other chief ministers, so that the king and his council may be able, without the embarrassment of other business, to attend to the important business of his kingdom and his foreign lands. Put another way, that says, I am the king. I am very busy. I am very important. I don't have time to deal with these trivial matters, so I'm going to put all of that into the hands of the chancellor. And what the chancellor did was he created a special court, the Court of Chancery, and this court was different from the normal courts. The normal courts said, here is a piece of paper, Sir Bob signed it, and he gave everything to Hubert, and therefore it belongs to Hubert. And the Court of Chancery was a little bit different, and it said, yes, that's very interesting, but we're also interested in the truth. We're interested in the real situation. We're interested in something like, we can say, like justice. And if you think about the justice of this case, who does the castle belong to? Of course, we know that it really belongs to Sir Bob. It might be that Hubert is the legal owner, but Sir Bob is what we call the equitable owner, or beneficial owner, if you like, and it is Sir Bob who is the real owner of those castles and those lands. And that basic idea, the idea of saying that there is the possibility that somebody is the legal owner of something, but that somebody else is the real owner, that's a trust. And that is how, in the year 1280, that is how trusts began. And then trusts spread, because this is an idea that came from England, and this idea is a good idea. And this good idea spread around the world. It spread around the world as the British Commonwealth or British Empire expanded. And so you find trusts not just in England, but also in Australia, and also in the US, and also in South Africa, and also in India. And this concept spread to almost all of the countries of the British Empire. And because it's a good idea, it spread even further. So if I take, for example, a look at a map of Europe, and I go back, 100, 150 years ago and say, where can I find trusts? I can find trusts in, of course, Great Britain, and I can find trusts in Cyprus. I can find trust in Malta, but hard to see on this map. These are the places where the British Empire reached. But in those times, continental Europe, for example, didn't have trusts. It didn't recognize this idea that sometimes there can be a legal owner and sometimes somebody else is really the owner. But if I look at the situation today, it looks different. It looks like this. The dark green is showing places where trusts or foundations or something that looks like a trust, but maybe has a different name. The dark green areas show places where these things exist, where they are accepted and where they are used. The greeny yellow shows places where those things are potentially coming, and the very light green shows places where maybe they are not part of the local legal system, but nevertheless they somehow work to some extent. And that's Europe. If you look around the world, you will see similar examples. So trusts you will find in the Middle East, you will find them in China, you find them in Mexico, you find them in Brazil, you find them all around the world. Of course, not everywhere, So I can see Germany, I can see Scandinavia doesn't have trusts, but they are fairly common and fairly widespread. So in the next video, we're going to go on and look at what actually a trust is. But for now, that's a little bit of a teaser to get you to understand a little bit of the history. What's next? Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. That way you'll get notified when new videos come out. And also you can find out more information on my website, which is www.uplift.cz. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to sharing more videos with you in the future. Thank you.